Reminder for our viewers who may be joining us at the top of the hour that you're watching a BBC News special. We're expecting a news conference, a coronavirus briefing from number 10 Downing Street with the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and his Chief Medical Advisor and Chief Scientific Advisor. And we believe that we're expecting to hear tighter restrictions being announced for particularly the London and southeast areas of England as a result of this mutation, this variant of COVID-19, which spreads much more quickly. And we understand that in the last couple of hours or so, the scientific, last couple of days rather, the scientific data has been pretty alarming for ministers, and they've seen those numbers. And as a result, we're probably going to get this announcement in the next few minutes or so. We're expecting it at the top, very top of the hour. We understand it's been delayed by 3 or 4 minutes, so we'll hang on for that. Stay with us here on BBC News. We'll bring you that live, of course. Nick Eardley, our political correspondent, is here. I just want to understand what Tier 4 means practically for viewers who are just joining us now. What could that mean for people here in London and in the southeast? I
think it will have a big impact, and it will feel a lot like lockdown. So I don't expect that supermarkets will close. They haven't closed so far, but I do think that non-essential shops are likely to close. There are questions over what will happen to things like hairdressers over the next couple of weeks, to gyms as well. It is going to be a pretty big impact on people's lives over the next couple of weeks. And it's also, it's important when we're talking about why this is happening to remember that the R rate, so the rate of infection in the UK, according to the most recent data which came out yesterday, has gone above 1. So I think that's a really important context, that this pandemic in the UK is growing again. For a while, it was below 1, and the government was hoping that after the lockdown in England in November, that things were beginning to move in the right direction. I think now they've concluded that they're moving in the wrong direction. So Tier 4, certainly in London, certainly in the southeast of England, quite possible in other parts of the country as well. We may well see other restrictions in Scotland over the next few hours as well. And they will have a pretty big impact on our lives. Christmas this year is not going to feel the same as it does. It's not going to feel the same as the picture that many of us thought had emerged on Wednesday, where, yes, it was a message of don't do it if you don't have to, but, there was still the legal possibility of doing it. I think, frankly, in an hour's time, we're going to be talking about a much bleaker picture when it comes to, what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks.
And are we potentially, Nick, from a political point of view and a medical point of view, going to see a tightening of what these tiers actually are? Because since the lockdown, it's clear that the tier system, because the numbers are continuing to go up, has worked. It's been patchy, but it certainly hasn't been the overall success that everyone hoped.
We'll put it this way, there have been many in government who've been really resisting the idea of Tier 4 in England. We've heard some ministers dismiss it as a prospect. They didn't want to do this. They didn't want to tighten the tiers more than they had already done when we came out of the lockdown in England at the start of December. Things have changed quite significantly over the last 72 hours, though, and it is the warnings over this new variant of the virus, which, remember, don't necessarily make you more ill. They don't necessarily mean that treatment doesn't work. They don't necessarily mean that the vaccine won't work. But the real concern is that it's starting to spread a lot quicker in parts of the southeast of England and in London. And it's that context that means that Boris Johnson's about to announce a big tightening of restrictions in that part of the country, and potentially some fairly significant measures that could impact people elsewhere as well. This is going to be a big announcement.
Yeah, we've just actually got the latest coronavirus figures that have just been reported for us. COVID-19 UK reports 27,052 new cases of COVID-19. That's in the last 24-hour period, and we had 28,507 on Friday. Slightly up. I don't think those figures have been updated actually, but let me give you what I've got in front of me here. 27,052 new cases of COVID-19. That's in the last 24-hour reporting period. And I can tell you as well, just coming into us, that we have 534 deaths in the last within 28 days of a positive COVID test. So that's 534 new deaths in the last 24-hour reporting period. That's of people diagnosed with COVID-19 having a positive test within 28 days. I suppose the big question as well is how long could these Tier 4 restrictions last, not just through the Christmas period, but perhaps how much longer beyond that?
It's a really good question, and it'll be interesting to see if the Prime Minister gives any update on that. You know, at the moment we do get fairly regular reviews, and remember that there are many MPs who aren't happy at the way that this process is being handled by the government, who have been promised a vote within the next few weeks about the restrictions which are in place. However, this picture is clearly changing quite quickly, because the last review was on Wednesday. You know, it was on Wednesday that some parts of the country were moved up to Tier 3. There was only a couple were moved down tiers on Wednesday into Thursday as well. Today's actually the day that that comes into force. And I think what we're about to see is a significant part of England told, actually, these tiers don't go far enough. Our advisors are now telling us that we need to go further and make sure that people really aren't mixing. The context is winter. Of course, winter is always a more difficult time for the NHS, and it does feel that the number of cases, the number of hospitalisations, and the concern over the emerging number of deaths has meant the government feels that it now has to act. There will be criticism politically that this decision wasn't taken sooner and that this Tier 4 wasn't announced at an earlier date. We know that the Labour Party, for example, were saying that they thought the restrictions over Christmas would have to be a lot tougher. But the fact that this is happening on the 19th of December, the fact that it's going to be introduced potentially just 5 days before Christmas, is a real sign of what's happening behind the scenes, which is huge concern from ministers and their scientific advisors about the spread of the virus.
But to be clear, the Prime Minister does not have to have the consent of Parliament for this. This is something that can be implemented straight away as soon as midnight tonight.
I think that's what's likely to happen, actually, so that there are ways that you can amend the law in Parliament without having to have a vote of MPs, and I suspect that's what will happen here. It'll be really interesting to see what Boris Johnson's party think of this, because just yesterday, speaking to cabinet ministers, there were some who were resisting further restrictions, who thought that Tier 4 was too extreme, who thought that it wasn't necessary and that we should keep on the path in England that has been pursued over the last few days. But I think that quite frankly, the data the Prime Minister was shown last night in a meeting with his scientific advisors and other ministers has meant that they felt the need to act. You know, it was only 6 weeks ago we last sat here on a Saturday looking at, Downing Street, waiting for the Prime Minister to appear at his podium. I hope he doesn't take as long this time, by the way, because it was a couple of hours late. But I think the point is that something has changed. Right. Something has spooked ministers, and the feeling now is that they can't wait to act. So I would expect some big announcements, some really quite, worrying announcements for a lot of us, things that will probably wreck our plans over the next couple of weeks, but ones that ministers feel are absolutely essential. Yeah,
nighttime pictures there of number 10 in Westminster. Inside, 3 podiums awaiting the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, his Chief Medical Advisor and Chief Scientific Advisor, to come out and give us the very latest information on the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. We're being told that it's just going to be a few minutes before they come out, a little bit delayed, but everyone waiting for that big announcement shortly. Nick, I suppose everyone was going into the festive season understanding that there was going to be a relaxation of the rules into the new year with a vaccine
for the care home residents and staff, but also allow safer visiting as well.
Councillor Bunting for supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the Minister for his answer. So moving now towards the vaccine, he'll be aware that there are numerous people who have underlying conditions which
because the news conference is beginning. Prime Minister, flanked on his left by Chief Medical Officer and Chief Scientific Advisor.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining the latest coronavirus press conference. Yesterday afternoon, I was briefed on the latest data that shows the virus spreading more rapidly in London, the south east and the east of England than would be expected, given the tough restrictions that are already in place. And I also received an explanation for why the virus is spreading more rapidly in these areas. It seems that the spread is now being driven by the new variant of the virus, which we spoke about earlier this week and learned about earlier this week. Our advisory group on new and emerging respiratory virus threats, NERVTAG, has spent the last few days analysing this new variant. There's no evidence that it causes more severe illness or higher mortality, but it does appear to be passed on significantly more easily. NERVTAG's early analysis suggests the new variant could increase the R by 0.4 or more, and although there's considerable uncertainty, it may be up to 70% more transmissible than the old variant, the original version of the disease. This is early data and it's subject to review, but it's the best that we have at the moment, and we have to act on information as we have it, because this is now spreading very fast. The UK has by far the best genomic sequencing ability in the world, which means we're better able to identify new strains like this than any other country. The Chief Medical Officer last night submitted our findings so far to the World Health Organization, and will continue to be totally transparent with our global partners. There's still much that we don't know. While we're fairly certain the variant is transmitted more quickly, there's no evidence to suggest it is more lethal or causes more severe illness. Equally, there's no evidence to suggest the vaccine will be any less effective against the new variant. Our experts will continue their work to improve our understanding as fast as we can. So we're learning about it as we go, but we already know enough, more than enough, to be sure that we must act now. So I met ministers on the COVID Operations Committee last night, and again first thing this morning. Cabinet met at lunchtime to agree the following actions. First, we will introduce new restrictions in the most affected areas, specifically those parts of London, the South East and the East of England, which are currently in Tier 3. These areas will enter a new Tier 4, which will be broadly equivalent to the national restrictions which were in place in England in November. That means residents in those areas must stay at home, apart from limited exemptions set out in law. Non-essential retail, indoor gyms and leisure facilities and personal care services must close. People must work from home if they can, but may travel to work if this is not possible, for example, in the construction and manufacturing sectors. People should not enter or leave Tier 4 areas, and Tier 4 residents must not stay overnight away from home. Individuals can only meet one person from another household in an outdoor public space. Unlike the November national restrictions, communal worship can continue to take place in Tier 4 areas, and these measures will take effect from tomorrow morning. All tiers will continue to be regularly reviewed in line with the approach previously set out, with the next formal review taking place on the 30th of December. Second, we're issuing new advice on travel. Although the new variant is concentrated in Tier 4 areas, it is nonetheless present at lower levels around the country. So we're asking everyone in all tiers to stay local. People should carefully consider whether they need to travel abroad, and they should follow the rules in their tier. Those in Tier 4 areas will not be permitted to travel abroad, apart from limited exceptions such as for work purposes. Third, we must, I'm afraid, look again at Christmas. And as Prime Minister, it's my duty to take difficult decisions, to do what is right to protect the people of this country. Given the early evidence we have on this new variant of the virus, the potential risk it poses, it is with a very heavy heart, I must tell you, we cannot continue with Christmas as planned. In England, those living in Tier 4 areas should not mix with anyone outside their own household at Christmas, though support bubbles will remain in place for those at particular risk of loneliness or isolation. Across the rest of the country, the Christmas rules allowing up to 3 households to meet will now be limited to Christmas Day only, rather than the 5 days as previously set out. As before, there will be no relaxation on the 31st of January, so people must not break the rules at New Year. They must not break the rules at New Year. It's very, very important to emphasise that. I know how much emotion people invest in this time of year and how important it is, for instance, for grandparents to see their grandchildren, for families to be together. So I know how disappointing this will be. But we have said throughout this pandemic that we must and we will be guided by the science. When the science changes, we must change our response. And when the virus changes its method of attack, we must change our method of defence. And as your Prime Minister, I sincerely believe there is no alternative open to me. Without action, the evidence suggests that infections would soar, hospitals would become overwhelmed, and many thousands more would lose their lives. And I want to stress that we are not alone in this fight or in taking these types of decisions. Many of our European friends and neighbours are being forced to take similar action. We're working closely with the devolved administrations to protect people in every part of the UK. And of course, there is now real hope that we will soon be rid of this virus. And that prospect is growing with every day that passes and every vaccine dose that is administered. As you know, the UK was the first country in the Western world to start using a clinically approved vaccine. And so please, if the NHS contacts you, then get your vaccine and join the 350,000 people across the UK who have already had their first dose. Yes, Christmas this year will be different, very different, but we must be realistic. We're sacrificing the chance to see our loved ones this Christmas so we have a better chance of protecting their lives so that we can see them at future Christmases. And as sure as night follows day, we'll beat back this virus, we'll defeat it and reclaim our lives. But I'm going to hand over now to Patrick, who is going to go through some of the slides explaining this decision.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. May I have the first slide, please? This slide is the Office for National Statistics slide showing infections have risen again in recent weeks. So it shows the percentage of positive tests against time, and you can see from July to September it was fairly flat. An increase occurred during September up to a peak, after which the lockdown led to a decrease in the numbers during November, and it is now on the increase again. So the lockdown brought the numbers down, and now we are seeing them rising again. Next slide, please. This shows the levels on the 29th of November up to the 13th of December. So on the left-hand side is the average cases in the last 2 weeks from November the 29th, and on the right-hand side is in mid-December. The darker the colour, the higher the number of cases. And what you can see is, first of all, that there are some areas that have got very dark, and here it's South Wales and in the southeast of England, and that the overall cases have increased by more than 50%. So a substantial increase in numbers over the period of December. If I just concentrate now on the southeast, east and London, we'll see a picture which I think begins to link into the new virus variant. Next slide, please. So this is hospital admissions per day in London, the east of England and the southeast from NHS data from September through to now. You can see a gradual increase in the number of hospital admissions per day, and you can see a very sharp increase during December. This virus has taken off, it's moving fast, and it's leading inevitably to a sharp increase in hospital admissions. Next slide, please. If we now look just at the areas that are moving into Tier 4, as the Prime Minister has just said, which is areas in London, the South East and the East, and look at the number of cases, the case rate against time, what you can see is that the number of cases increase, or the case rate increases dramatically. If you look at the dotted line, that's for England as a whole. You can see case rate increasing to November, decreasing during lockdown and increasing again. But if you look at the solid blue line, which is London and the South East and the East in Tier 4, you can see a rapid increase, a very sharp increase in rates over the period of December. So we have a particularly fast-moving problem with increased numbers in the area going to Tier 4, but a generalised increase across the country. Next slide, please. I'd like to just spend a moment talking about the new variant. So the new variant, and viruses mutate all the time, but the new variant contains 23 different changes, many of them associated with changes in the protein that the virus makes. This is an unusually large number of variants. It's also got variants in areas of the virus that are known to be associated with how the virus binds to cells and enters cells. So there are some changes which cause concern in terms of how the virus looks. But on top of that, there are three questions that need to be asked. Does the new variant transmit more readily, i.e. does it make an increased chance of spread and growth? The second is, does it alter the course of the disease? Does it make people sicker? And the third is, does it alter the way that the immune system, the way the body responds to it if it's been previously infected or following a vaccine? I want to deal with the first question. There are three different sources of evidence, from genetic studies to frequency studies to laboratory studies, all of which come together to suggest this virus has a significant, substantial increase in transmissibility. And this is also highlighted in this graph, which shows the proportion of all the cases that were due to the new variant. So the new variant was first thought to have occurred sometime in mid-September in London or Kent, and by the middle of November, about 28% or so of the cases in London and the South East, and slightly lower in the east of England, were due to the new variant. So it had grown rapidly. By the week commencing the 9th of December, these figures were much higher. So in London, over 60% of all the cases were the new variant. So what this tells us is that this new variant not only moves fast, it is increased in terms of its ability to transmit, but it is becoming the dominant variant. It is beating all the others in terms of transmission. So this virus transmits and spreads fast. Does it alter the disease course? The answer seems to be no, as far as we can tell at the moment. There's no evidence. It causes a more severe disease, causes more hospitalization, causes more trouble than the other virus. So it basically looks similar. Does it alter the immune response, or is the immune response less able to recognize it? There are theoretical reasons to suspect that some of the changes might alter some of the immune responses, but there's nothing that's been seen to suggest that's the case. And our working assumption at the moment from all of the scientists is that the vaccine response should be adequate for this virus. That's obviously needs to be looked at going forward, and we need to keep vigilant about this. But the big change, therefore, is not the disease progress, not the immunity, but transmission. This virus spreads more easily, and therefore more measures are needed to keep it under control. We absolutely need to stick to the basics of making sure that we reduce our contacts, reduce the ability for this virus to spread, and that's the reason that tougher measures are required to keep this variant under control. Thank you very much.
Thanks very, very much, Patrick. Chris, is there anything you want to add to any of that? And well, thank you very much. Then let's go to questions from the public and then the media. First, Laura from Worthing.
Why are shielders still expected to work in Tier 3? As somebody who's already lost 2 loved ones to COVID, this terrifies me. Thank you.
Well, Laura, your question why shielders are still expected to work in Tier 3. Those who are shielding, those who are vulnerable, should of course take every step to protect themselves. And Laura, I hope very much that you're not being asked to work if you're shielding. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is I'm really sorry to hear about your 2 relatives who died from this virus. I mean, it is a very dangerous virus for many people. The shielding patterns are actually being re-looked at, but the view about shielding is that in the first wave, shielding did many things that were useful, but also did many things that were actually actively harmful. And we have therefore changed the model of shielding since the first wave. And that includes people being able to get out more in many situations and also areas around work. But this is something which people are keeping on looking at to try and get the optimal balance between isolating people too much and isolating them enough from the virus.
Thanks very much. Let's go to Mike from Cheshire. Mike from Cheshire asks, in the daily update figures, people testing positive, number of tests, deaths and so forth, could you also provide the number of people who've had the vaccine? Well, Mike, thanks for that. And yes, as you've heard from me just now, the figure that I've been given today is 350,000 have so far had their first dose. And we'll make sure that we keep people regularly updated on the rollout of the vaccine. Let's go to Laura Koonsberg of the BBC.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. There were calls for you to drop the plans for Christmas last week, just a few days ago. But on Wednesday, you told me and our viewers it would be inhuman to change the plans. And now that's exactly what you've done. Aren't the millions of people whose plans have just been torn up entitled to feel that you just left this too late and you've caused them more personal disruption and upset by doing so? And can I ask the medics, you've shared some of the analysis of this new variant, but you mentioned that Porton Down have been looking at this in the earlier press conference this week. Can you say if Porton Down have completed their assessments of it? And Professor Whitty, if someone is packing a bag right now, listening to or watching this, trying to leave the southeast by midnight tonight, what should they do?
Well, Laura, let me first of all just say to everybody who's made plans for Christmas, as I said earlier on, everybody who's thought about it, all the care and love that's gone into plans for Christmas, we, of course, bitterly regret the changes that are necessary. But alas, when the facts change, you have to change your approach. And the briefing that I had yesterday about this mutation of the virus, particularly about the speed of transmission, was not possible to ignore. And as I say, when the virus changes its method of attack, we as a country have to change our method of defence, and that's what we're doing.
Shall I take the one that was addressed directly to me, and then Sir Patrick may want to talk about Porton Down? I want to put some numbers out there because I think that helps to explain why I'm going to give the answer that I'm going to give. But my short answer would be, please unpack it at this stage. The reason for that is if you look at the southeast, if you look at the east of England and look at London, there's been a really dramatic increase in the proportion of the cases that we see that are, when we do on the screening tests, which are not absolutely exact but pretty accurate, would imply that in the southeast, 43% of the virus is now this new variant. In the east of England, it's 59%, and in London, 62%. The numbers may vary slightly, but those numbers are broadly right. And those have gone up very, very fast over the last few weeks. So this has really gone incredibly quickly. They are much lower in other areas of the country. And then when you look at the rates of increase in hospitalisations there have been, the numbers of people in hospital across the country, what you see is in the areas where this is very, very common, you're seeing rates of increase of maybe 36% in east of England, 34% in London, and 28% in the southeast. These are the areas which actually have significant numbers of this new variant. But if you go to, let's say, the northwest and the northeast and Yorkshire, in these areas there has been no increase in hospitalisations. They're managing to keep things down with tier 3. And if you look at the rates of this new variant in those areas, you see they're much lower. So, for example, in Yorkshire and the Humber, around 5%. Now, again, the exact numbers don't matter. But the point is that if you have a lower amount of this variant, the rate of increase is held by the tiers. If you have a very high rate of this variant, then it is not held sufficiently by the tiers and it is going up rapidly. And our big worry is essentially this is growing in two directions. It's growing up in terms of percentage where it is. So it's getting a higher and higher proportion of the cases. And as Sir Patrick said, the chance if someone gets infected of them having to go to hospital or dying at the end of it seem to be roughly the same, as far as we can see so far, as the previous variant. And if they were to go with this new variant, unwittingly, to an area that has a low prevalence and start this being seeded even more outside the high prevalence areas, that would be a significant risk to the area they went to. So that is the reason we are really keen that people do not go from these areas, because otherwise we'll not only see it going up in the areas that's already a problem, we'll see it going out to other areas of the country where it currently is not a problem. And that it was because we understood this information in the back end of this week that we advised you really do have to act at this stage, because this is otherwise every area of the country will get this very quickly, and then none of them will be able to hold things with tier 3 and tier 2 elsewhere.
Thanks very much, Laura. Robert Pesson,
Should I just
ITV.
answer the
forgive me.
question? Sorry, just to answer the Porton Down question. Porton Down are looking at this all the time. When data become available, we'll make sure we get it out as soon as we can, but we don't have any more information than we've shared today.
Thanks very much, Laura. Let's go to Robert Pesson, ITV.
Your colleague on Sage, John Edmonds, has just sent me a statement saying that as far as he's concerned, this is the worst moment of the epidemic because of the extraordinary infectivity of this new strain. Do you agree with Professor Edmonds? We saw the virus rising in Kent during the lockdown and during tier 3. Why didn't you take evasive action then to close down Kent, even before you knew that there was a new strain? And what confidence do you have that the new tier 4 measures will suppress the virus, given that the lockdown did not suppress it in Kent?
Well, perhaps I could just give a layman's answer, Robert, because I think the whole point is that we were very puzzled during the November the 5th to December the 3rd autumn measures by why the tier 3 system wasn't delivering the results in Kent that it was delivering, and a couple of other places that it was delivering, for instance, in the northwest, and clearly there was something going on. It's not really, I think, it'd be fair to say, until yesterday, as we've seen this data on transmissibility, that we've really got the answer that explains it. And today's action is a response to that change in the science. That's my layman's answer.
Yeah, I mean, is it the worst moment? Well, I'm afraid there have been so many terrible moments in this epidemic. This is another one. But I have to say that in my own view, this is not the worst moment in the epidemic. And the reason for that is, although this virus is more transmissible, and we must do everything we can, which is what the Prime Minister has announced, to keep it as constrained as possible, keep it down as much as possible so it does not spread, we do have medical countermeasures. We have a vaccine already being rolled out, as the Prime Minister said, and therefore there is a prospect relatively in the sort of medium-term future where things could be quite a lot better. And if you think back to the dark days at the end of March and April, not only were the numbers going up incredibly fast, mortality was actually higher than now because medical treatment has got better, but we had no vaccines on the horizon, they were in the far horizon. So I think this is a situation which is going to make things a lot worse. There are some really optimistic things if you look once we get the vaccine out, assuming that the vaccine works against this, which I think at the moment is our working assumption. And that is, we really must hold the line. And my view, and Patrick will want to add to this, is what we must absolutely do is slow this down absolutely as much as possible. And if we can take it down from a doubling time of every 7 days, which it is in many areas, which is really fast if you think about that compounding up, and pull it right out, even if we don't manage to put it all the way down, and we hope we will, at least then we're not going to have this skyrocketing number, we're not going to have the numbers spreading out across the country, and that will give us a chance to get the vaccine out and protect the most vulnerable people, so that if it does then escape, what we have is the barrier of the vaccine to help protect them. So I think this is a bad moment. That's the reason the decisions have been taken by the Prime Minister and ministers, but there is at least this prospect in the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, this is a horrible moment for sure. I think we should, though, thank that we've got the genetic sequencing consortium that's actually got onto this very fast and found an explanation of what was going on. I think that's really important that we've got that, and we'll continue to utilise that resource in the UK. And we know what needs to happen to try and slow this down, and it's the basic things. I mean, although this is complicated in many ways, in other ways it's really simple. Reduce contacts, do the basics, face, hands, space. Make sure that that is what we do to try and resist the ability of the virus to spread from one person to another, and it will slow it down. And that's what we need to make sure we get on top of, as Chris said. I think this will slow it down, and we need to make sure we keep a lid on this. It's not a good moment for sure, but it's one that's controllable. And as Chris said, there is an important light at the end of the tunnel with vaccination having started.
Thanks very much, both. And thanks, Robert. Let's go to Sam Coates of Sky News.
Prime Minister, this decision will be upsetting for millions of people. So could you just speak directly to everyone suddenly now spending Christmas Day alone? What hope can you give them? And similarly, what's your message to people considering gambling and breaking the rules? And finally, how long realistically do you think everyone will have to stay in Tier 4? Is there any chance it's in place until enough people have had a vaccine? And to the two scientists, is the new strain impervious to social distancing measures? Might the 2-metre rule and existing face coverings no longer be enough to protect people? Would you travel in a train carriage through Kent tonight?
Well, thanks very much, Sam. Obviously, these measures, as I say, will be reviewed like all the others every 2 weeks, and there'll be a chance for Parliament to consider them, obviously, along with all the other tiering questions at the end of January. Obviously, people should not break the rules. Obviously, people should follow the guidance. I hope very much that elderly or lonely people who are able to form bubbles, who have household bubbles, will have that consolation. That's clear from what we've said today. But I suppose what I would say to everybody who's now thinking of having a much reduced Christmas, of course, we bitterly regret that this is necessary this year. I know how much love and care and thought goes into preparations for Christmas. I suppose the message is, that this is the year to lift a glass to those who aren't there, in the knowledge that it's precisely because they aren't there to celebrate Christmas with you this year that we will have a better chance that they'll be there next year to celebrate Christmas with you. I suppose that would be my message, Sam, to the country.
In terms of the social distancing, yes, social distancing does work. It doesn't work as a yes-no. The more things you do, the more determinedly you do them, the more people do the basics for themselves, all the things Patrick talked about, the hands, face, space things, but also break unnecessary household links. the more this and every other respiratory virus goes down. And just to give some other examples, for example, flu rates are down, adenovirus rates are down, because they also have exactly the same effect on other respiratory viruses. We do not think that the current measures will not work against this, but we're going to have to do a lot more in a sense, to stand still. It's like you were cycling up a steep hill and now you've got the wind against you as well. You just have to do that much more to actually keep going. And that's really what we're going to have to do. But the actual tools themselves, unfortunately, remain the same tools. And would I go through Kent? Not unless it was absolutely necessary. Not because I don't love Kent. Kent is fantastic. But because this is not the moment with this virus circulating to have unnecessary travel. So only if there was a very good reason.
Thanks very much, Sam. Let's go to Chris Hope of the Daily Telegraph. Chris, you need to unmute, I think. We can see you.
Can you hear me, Prime Minister?
Yes, got you.
Forgive me for that. How will this be policed, Prime Minister? Do you think police should be stopping people from travelling outside of the Tier 4? And do you advise police to knock on the door of households that break these rules on Christmas Day? And are these an admission that the tiers have failed? Are we back to essentially lockdown until March? And just for the scientists and medics, I wonder why Britain has got this one so bad, this variant so bad. Which other countries have it? And how did the new variant get here, please?
Well, Chris, first of all, I think the police have done an amazing job of enforcement, light touch enforcement. They've handed out lots of FPNs, fifth penalty notices for breaches of the rules, but they've also helped to keep people overwhelmingly in line with what they need to do. And that's, you know, I really thank the police, men and women up and down the country for what they're doing. I'm sure they'll continue to do it in the same way throughout this period. But I'm sure, above all, I think people will naturally want to do it themselves, as they've done throughout this crisis. The bulk of the population take this incredibly seriously, get it right, and they'll continue to do so.
In terms of the question about why here and where else is it, viruses mutate all the time. So lots and lots of mutations of the virus around the world. This one is a particular constellation of changes which we think is important. I think they'll arise for every time a virus replicates, it can make a mistake. And so that some of these things just arise by chance. The question is what advantage it gives the virus. And this one seems to have given the advantage of transmissibility. We think it may be in other countries as well. We think it probably is based mainly, we think there's a large outbreak in the UK. It may have started here, we don't know for sure. There will be other types of mutations around the world. It's very important that this sequencing effort to try and find out what the sequence is doing, how much has changed, is looked at a global level, and we start to get a handle on where these changes are occurring in the virus across the world. It's going to be an important part of surveillance going forward.
Brill, thank you. Nigel Nelson, Sunday Mirror.
One for the Prime Minister. Given you were at least aware that there was a new variant of the virus out there as far back as November, do you now feel it was reckless to promise 5 days of Christmas against scientific advice? And if I may ask Chris Whitty a question, earlier in the week you were talking about keeping meetings at Christmas time short without specifying what short was. Can you say now for tiers 1, 2 and 3 whether that should be seeing Granny for a cup of tea for an hour, a 2-hour Christmas lunch, or 4 hours going to sleep over the telly?
Well, no, Nigel. First of all, thank you very much. But we've always taken account of scientific advice, always tried to follow it, and that is what we're doing today, because the science is clearly changing and has changed in the sense that our understanding of this new virus, its transmissibility, has been radically shifted just in the last 24 hours, and certainly the understanding of the people before you here this afternoon. And we simply can't ignore that. And that's why we're taking these extra steps today to protect the country.
In answer to the question you put to me, I mean, what I said, and I'm very happy to repeat it, is to the extent you possibly can, keep it small, keep it short, keep it local, and remember the vulnerable are vulnerable. And that is still absolutely the message. So if you've got your grandmother, you really want to minimise the amount of contact. You want to keep it at a distance. You do want to have the shortest period you can, because what you really want is to get to the point when your grandmother has been vaccinated, ideally when you and people around you have been vaccinated, taking the risk right down. At that point, we're in a different place. But at this point in time, at this really, really critical and dangerous time, pre-vaccine but high transmission, I would repeat it: keep it small, keep it short, keep it local, and remember the vulnerable. And short should mean as short as you can manage with a reasonable social interaction.
And I think one way to think about it is assume you could be infectious. I mean, it's not somebody else's issue, it's your own issue. You might be infectious, and that's the way that we have to behave at this moment. Assume you might be infectious.
Yes, it can't be stressed too often that a lot of the transmission of the infection is by people who don't have symptoms at the time. And I don't think people have still now fully get that in the way that perhaps they need to. It's absolutely vital, I think. I think 1 in 3 infections are transmitted asymptomatically still, and people really need to realise that. Can we go to Anna Mikhailova of the Mail on Sunday?
Prime Minister, you said earlier that when the facts change, you have to change your approach. But the facts 3 days ago were you knew about the new strain and you knew that infections were rising. And still you said it was too late to cancel Christmas. How do you expect people to follow the rules when they keep changing? And secondly, another question for you, Prime Minister. Are you going to put any additional support in place for businesses and shops that have to close now?
Thanks, Anna. Well, on the facts of the science, I think we've tried to spell out this afternoon what has changed, and what has changed is the velocity of transmission, our understanding of how fast this disease is transmitted, and the susceptibility of people to getting it. As I say, NervTag thinks it's up to 70% more transmissible now than the old variant. We simply can't ignore that. That's data that's been in our possession now for a day or so. We have to act to protect the public. And obviously, Anna, we will do everything that we can, as usual, to look after business, to look after jobs and livelihoods throughout the pandemic. And we'll continue to do that with the loan scheme, with furloughing, which the Chancellor has now extended right the way through to the end of April. We'll continue to look after people. Businesses that are forced to close as a result of what alas is happening, they will receive the protections that we have put in place, the loans, the grants that we've put in place, and we'll continue with all that. But I want to stress that this is a race, and we still are doing our absolute level best to protect the public, whilst we know that the vaccine is arriving. And I'm very, very confident, more confident than ever, that we'll get that vaccine into a significant proportion of the population by the spring, and that things will be radically different for our country by Easter. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And although this is unquestionably a difficult moment in the campaign against this virus, in the struggle against this virus, those fundamental facts, that fundamental reason for optimism about the progress that we have made, that remains unchanged. Thank you all very much.
So the Prime Minister concluding that coronavirus briefing. Sombre and sobering news there, along with Professor Chris Whitty and Professor Patrick Vallance. Let's just recap the main details of that news conference, the very significant changes that have been announced for Christmas, and London and the South East will affect something like 17.7 million people. The Prime Minister said the new variant of the virus has led to an alarming spread of COVID-19 across the South East, east of England and London. He said it was 70% more transmissible than the original virus. So the upshot of all that, is that the planned relaxation of coronavirus rules for Christmas has been scrapped for those affected areas. And in other parts of England, the gathering of 3 households for the festive season can now only take place on Christmas Day. From midnight tonight, the tightest restrictions will be part of a new Tier 4 category, similar to the last national lockdown in November. And it will affect areas such as Kent, Essex, Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire, and all 32 boroughs of London. People will be advised not to travel into or out of Tier 4 areas, and the restrictions come in from midnight tonight. In Tier 4, a stay-at-home order will be issued to residents, although those who have to travel for education or work may continue to do so. Social mixing will be restricted to the meeting of one other person in an open public space. All non-essential retail will have to close, along with hairdressers, nail bars and indoor entertainment venues. And let's take a look at those scaled back Christmas plans for people in Tier 4. There is no household mixing for areas in that category, but support bubbles are unaffected by that. And for areas in Tiers 1 to 3, people can only mix on Christmas Day for one day only, as I say. Okay, let's get a little bit more perspective now. Nick Eardley is here. Nick, you were on the money. This was going to be a pretty dire assessment of the situation, not just for those areas, London, the southeast of England and England, where we knew this variant was pretty rampant, but other parts of the country as well, right across England.
Well, look, I mean, this is a massive change for the country just a few days ahead of Christmas. It means that roughly a third of people in England are going to be living in that Tier 4 from midnight, which is going to have a huge impact on people's lives and, of course, their Christmas plans as well as the wider economy. I mean, I think you got a pretty sombre message from the Prime Minister there. It's one which has changed significantly in 72 hours. It's gone from try not to move too far for Christmas if you can, to telling a third of England you can't travel for Christmas. If you're in Tier 4, don't leave. Don't go and stay the night at other people's houses. Don't form that Christmas bubble. And for everybody else in Tier 2 and Tier 1 in England, saying to them, if you do want to still form a Christmas bubble, you can only do it on Christmas Day. It's a reflection of how worried ministers are about the new data they are receiving, those figures about that new variant of the virus. And although what we've just heard applies to England only, I think people in Scotland and Wales should keep an eye on the telly over the next couple of hours as well, because I don't think England is going to be alone in tightening some of its restrictions of what's going to happen over Christmas.
Yeah, we're expecting statements from the devolved governments in Scotland and Wales in the next few minutes or so. A few of the journalists asking questions, including our own Laura Koonsberg, our political editor, questioning the fact that the government knew of this variant some time ago. And indeed, Matt Hancock stood up in the Commons and talked about it on Monday, saying that it spreads far more quickly than the original COVID-19. And yet we're getting these decisions now. People have made plans. Christmas has basically been put on hold for pretty much everybody around the country. One wonders why it's taken such a long period of time, relatively a number of days, to reach this conclusion that the country has got to do something even more stringent than the previous tier suggested.
I think it's a fair question, and it's a frustration that's felt in political circles as well. We know that on Wednesday, for example, at Prime Minister's Questions, there were big questions coming from the Labour Party about why things weren't being toughened up, about why Christmas wasn't being potentially considerably scaled back. I think the answer that you would get from ministers is that the data they've seen over the last 24 hours has really spooked them, quite frankly. We know that there were some hastily arranged conversations last night in Downing Street. There were more this morning, and it's on the back of that that this decision to really scale back Christmas and to introduce that new Tier 4 has been taken. I should just let you know as well, Clive, just kind of looking at the phone whilst that press conference was going on, there are some Tory MPs who are frustrated, who think that it's a sign that the system isn't working, who want a vote on whether this Tier 4 should be brought in, potentially even the recall of Parliament to discuss this new data and what's happening. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, although it's not impossible. The big thing that everybody needs to know is these changes are going to come in at midnight, regardless of some of the political criticism you hear over the next few hours. But undoubtedly a big change to what's happening in England, a big change to what the government thinks is necessary in England. And I think we're going to hear some pretty similar changes coming in Scotland and Wales in the next couple of hours as well.
All right, Nick, many thanks for that. Nick Eardley there, our political correspondent. Let's go now to our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, who can join us now. Fergus, we heard Patrick Vallance, the chief scientific advisor, and Sir Chris Whitty talk about this variant of COVID-19, and also talk about just how virulent it is in the way that it spreads within the host community.
Yeah, we've got to be careful about the terminology, Clive, because this variant doesn't make the virus more virulent, which would suggest that it causes more lethal infection. It simply means it spreads faster, up to 70% more rapid spread than the existing variants. And that means that they think the R number, which is the rate at which the virus spreads, could increase from the current level of 1.1 to 1.2 by 0.4. So a really quite dramatic increase in transmissibility. Now, viruses do mutate all the time. And in fact, coronavirus is a much more stable virus than, say, flu, because with flu, you'll know we need a new vaccine every year because it changes its outer clothes substantially so that it can evade the immune system. Now, it looks like these variants do not affect and will not affect the vaccine and its ability to give protection, although further checks are being done. But it's the sheer speed at which this new variant is spreading. It was first identified in Kent in late September and now accounts for around 6 in 10 cases in London and in East England, so the east of England. So it's really moving very fast and has been found in other parts of the UK as well.
Yeah, Fergus, the Prime Minister very pointedly made the case that virulence did not mean more lethality, and it didn't mean that anyone who contracted the virus in this new form would become more ill. But the World Health Organization has been informed of this. Are there any other countries that are experiencing this mutation?
Yes, there have been other countries, Germany, for example. Some other countries have had this mutation. It looks like it started somewhere in Kent, probably a chance mutation, because what happens with viruses, when they go from one person to another, every time they come into contact, there's slight changes as they replicate. And it was probably a chance mutation. And then every now and again, there comes a change that makes them, gives them an evolutionary edge, and those changes then go far and wide. Now, often, something reassuring to say is often a virus that is more transmissible actually loses a little bit of its lethality. But there are tests being done on human cell cultures at Porton Down in Wiltshire that will give us chapter and verse on that. But at the moment, although hospitalisation rates are going up, there's no suggestion that this variant, and there are 23 genetic changes that have been found within it, causes any more serious disease.
But the longer the virus is out there in general in the population, Fergus, the more it has the opportunity to mutate and to become a different variant and another and another.
Yes, that's right. And if we go back to the beginning of the year and the first coronavirus coming out of Wuhan, you can track probably about 2 changes a month from every virus that originated in China, around 2 a month. But as they've spread beyond China, it actually counts to thousands and thousands of mutations a year. But we really shouldn't worry. I mean, it sounds very scary, mutating virus, but viruses mutate all the time, and it's simply the transmissibility of this, which is alarming, but not the actual disease it causes, although, of course, for a minority of people, it's very, very serious indeed.
OK, we'll leave it there. Fergus, thank you for that. Fergus Walsh, our medical editor there. We're going to get some more reaction to the Prime Minister's comments there from the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer.
Well, look, the infection rates are going up very, very fast, and so something has to be done, and we support the steps the government's put in place. But millions of families across the country are going to be heartbroken by this news, having their Christmas plans ripped up. And I'm really frustrated because I raised this with the Prime Minister on Wednesday, and he dismissed that and went on to tell people to have a merry little Christmas, only 3 days later to rip up their plans. And I think the British public's entitled to more decisive leadership than that. They're getting confusion where they need certainty.
Less than a week before Christmas, has this come too late?
Well, we challenged the Prime Minister on Wednesday about this, and he pushed back that challenge and told people to have a merry little Christmas. And then 3 days later, he's ripping up their plans, and families will be heartbroken across the country as a result of this.
So would you say the way this has gone about is shambolic?
The Prime Minister has a habit of pushing away challenge, of refusing to see a problem until it later confronts him. And I think lots of families will be saying, how has this come about at the 11th hour in this way?
Do you think people will follow the rules?
It's very important that whatever the rules are, everybody follows them. So I say follow the government advice. Whatever tier you're in, follow the rules. It's very important that we all say that, the government and the opposition.
But isn't it a bit unfair to do one rule and then suddenly change with such short time?
I think the heartbreak of millions of families will be, made much greater by the fact that the Prime Minister only 3 days ago was saying, have a merry little Christmas, when we were challenging him on this, now to say, I'm going to rip up your plans.
Sir Keir Starmer there, giving his reaction to the Prime Minister's comments. We were just getting some news in from Wales, and they're going into lockdown. This is alert level 4 at midnight tonight. Christmas relaxation has been dropped to just 1 day, so a similar move to what the Prime Minister announced for England. Christmas relaxation has been dropped down to just 1 day, that's Christmas Day itself, and Wales will be going into lockdown, alert level 4 at midnight tonight. Let's get some more perspective from our health editor, Hugh Pym is here. One figure that jumped out at me, Hugh, was the rise in hospitalisations because of this variant, up by a third in many cases, 62% in London.
Yes, well, Clive, we could look at some of the slides that were shown in the Downing Street media briefing, which includes that. But the overall perspective, before getting to that, was provided with a slide from the Office for National Statistics. And that shows the growth in infections. The ONS covers the community, not just people who've tested and gone for a test. It does random testing of people who maybe are asymptomatic. So it's seen as a very good guide. And you can see how it reaches a peak in November, just as lockdown in England was being imposed. Then it comes down during lockdown and then starts going back up again. And that is the key factor that has been a cause for concern in Whitehall. But going on to those hospital admissions, and you see particularly in the areas concerned, London, the east of England and the southeast, which are going to tier 4, how rapidly they have gone up. So you see a sharp increase in October and then into November, then they remain fairly stable. That was during the lockdown in England. But look what's happened since the end of that lockdown in early December, how rapidly they've gone up. And that, according to Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance, is down to this new variant, a very steep rise in hospital admissions, and that is what is putting intense pressure on hospitals in these areas. Of course, it's a different picture in other parts of England, as we heard, in different tiers. Hospital admissions are not rising so rapidly, in fact have been coming down a bit in areas like the northwest. So finally, let's go on to see this comparison between the different parts of England. The dotted line there shows case rates in areas which are not going into tier 4, and you can see how they go up during lockdown but then begin to stabilise and come down. At the end of the English lockdown they come right back down, and then start rising again from early December once lockdown has ended and we've gone into the tier system. But they've not gone up nearly so much as that bold line there, which is the areas, London, the South East and the East, which are going into tier 4. You can see that they don't rise quite as rapidly in November. They start coming down during the English lockdown, and then they go up really, really steeply. And that, once again, is driven, we're told by the experts, by this new variant of the virus.
Indeed. All right, Hugh, many thanks for that. Hugh Pym, our health editor there. Well, a short time ago, the Prime Minister confirmed that London and the South East would now face new Tier 4 restrictions, which were similar to the November lockdown. Let's hear what he had to say.
We must, I'm afraid,